Thank you so much for coming this evening. My name is Glenn Orangelo, and I'm one of the founders and the development director for the Missoula Butterfly House and Insectarian. And in getting ready for this evening, I went to our shared drive on the computer and opened up the Bugs and Brews file, and I was just amazed because I kind of looked back and I already know this, but when you look back at all the different lectures that we've had, we started doing this in 2015, and minus the 2020-21 lecture series because of COVID, this is the 9th year of the lecture series that we're kicking off tonight for the 2025-26. Yeah, which is awesome. And as you all know, and I was talking to a few folks earlier that remembered us from the Insectarian down on Front Street, a lot has changed over the years, tremendously, since we were holding Bugs and Brews in that small classroom at the Insectarian. And while, yes, a lot has changed, there have been some incredible constants that have really enabled our unique education programs and things like Bugs and Brews to continue to grow. And one of those constants, I'm going to do a big shout out and a cheers to our friends at DraftWorks. Because hopefully I'm not a broken record, but we started this lecture series back in 2015, and DraftWorks has been there for every lecture that we've held, donating all the beer and the hard seltzer that you're enjoying this evening. And we've gotten to know their staff. We show up at least once a year for a little bug meet and greet at the brewery, and we've really developed a partnership that goes way beyond beverages. So to kick things off for the 25-26 lecture series, a huge thank you to DraftWorks for their years of partnership in helping create and spread some love for bugs through this unique lecture series. What I do want to mention, because when I popped over there to pick the beer up today, they have a beautiful outdoor deck if you haven't been out there before. And while we have a variety of different beers to choose from, they've got a lot that are only on tap. So it's a great place to be able to visit and try a couple of different things if there's other flavors that you so desire. So the other shout out that I want to give is to our friends at Missoula Community Access Television, better known as MCAT. Last year they began recording some of the lectures, and we are thrilled to have them back tonight as part of a media assistance grant donated to the Missoula Butterfly House and Insectarian. And so if you go to MCAT's YouTube page, you can search for Missoula Butterfly and you will find some of the past lectures that we've had from last year's series. So the moment that you've all been waiting for. So before we get into tonight's presentation, it's important to keep traditions going, and I am happy to present tonight's bug jokes. And you may not be very happy. All right, these are groaners, but how would you describe a beehive with no exit? Unbelievable. So I went to a bee supplier and wanted to purchase a dozen bees, and the owner placed them in a travel container, but upon inspection I let him know that you've given me 13 bees. He said, consider that one a freebie. And this one might be a repeat. I usually put a little note next to the jokes that I've said before, but it's a good one. Well, at least I like it. What do you call it when a stick insect needs to poop? A dowel movement. Okay. And with that, I think we're ready for the presentation. So tonight, I'm happy to introduce Suzanne Hendrich. Suzanne is a retired professor from Iowa State University and is a master naturalist, nature journaling enthusiast, and a member of the Dragonfly Society of the Americas, trying to learn as much as possible about dragonflies and damselflies. For the past several years, she's been focused on our local dragonfly and damselfly populations, and tonight she will be sharing some of her findings from her 2024 and 25 surveys. So with that, Suzanne.
Thanks, Glenn. It's hard to follow all those bee jokes. Whatever. So I'm a retired professor, and I guess that means that I could just like be in a room by myself and give this talk, and I would be totally happy just to be able to talk. So I've volunteered myself. Now this is the second time to give a talk at Bugs and Brews, and fortunately the Butterfly House was up for it. So this is a little bit of a continuation, and I guess I sort of realized in horror that there might be some things that I'm taking for granted that you know about dragonflies and damselflies. So feel free to ask questions as we go along if there's something that doesn't really make sense. I had, when I gave a talk for Bugs and Brews in March, I think, of 2023, I promised that I would start to do surveys of dragonflies and damselflies. And I am not quite, because it hasn't gotten to a hard freeze yet, not quite at the end of my second year, so there's still some data yet for me to collect, but I've got more or less a couple of years worth of surveys that I wanted to share with you. So I'm going to share a little bit of the process that I've been involved in doing this, and then share my species highlights from my two main sites, Maclay Flat and Milltown State Park ponds, are wetlands. A couple of the ponds have pretty much like disappeared this year, and one of them pretty much disappeared last year, and there's some other things at both of those sites that are interesting. And also some other local oating spots. Oating, I've been doing this thing for I don't know how long, like several years, maybe at least 5+ years, where I write a little haiku along with posting a nature picture or drawing that I've done on, I still have to call it Twitter. So I love that the term for looking for dragonflies and damselflies derived from their order name, the Odonata, is oating. So I enjoy that sort of poetic aspect of it. So there are a lot of spots, and probably there are spots that you know of that I don't, that would be really cool to explore. There are always a lot of other life forms, including amazing humans at these places, but a lot of fun local life forms going along with the dragonflies and damselflies. And whenever I go and visit friends or relatives in other parts of the country, they now know to be expected to be asked to take me to a swamp or a marsh. And so I just, thought, why not? There's some very amazing life forms. So in 2023, based on my observations, and I've added a little bit to it, I basically created an Excel spreadsheet that would allow me to try to record what different species I was observing. And these are pretty much the species that I'm aware of that are around Missoula. And I'm sure that there are some other species that I just haven't encountered or visited the right places to see. But you can see from here that there are basically a couple of main families of damselflies pond damselflies include bluets and the forktails, and then there are spread-winged damselflies. So the bluets and the forktails hold their wings right along their abdomens. So they're also referred to as narrow-winged, and the spread wings hold their wings at about a 45-degree angle. And the damselflies in general, if you aren't familiar with this already, are generally smaller, more delicate than most of the dragonflies. And they're, at least in my experience, I have some of you may be familiar with Dennis Paulson's wonderful book, Dragonflies and Damselflies of the West. And apparently there, in theory, are a bunch of other species than this that live here, but I just haven't found them yet. But among the dragonflies, there are basically darners, and there are also California darners here that I should have added to this list, and I'll show you a picture of that. And then skimmer dragonflies that include those 4, 8, 12 common whitetails and meadowhawks. And it's definitely meadowhawk season right now. I didn't really have a great rationale for choosing Maclay Flat and Milltown State Park, except that I have a background as a professor in toxicology. And all the years that my partner and I would come out here on our fishing trips, we always loved being able to actually catch fish in the biggest EPA Superfund site in the country, coming down from Butte along the Clark Fork. And so Milltown is, and I'm sure many of you are well familiar with, and it was great for us on one of our trips in 2007 to see the dam at Milltown finally gone. And then the park being then created over the next couple of years. And as part of the remediation and restoration effort there, after the sediment was removed and most of it returned to God knows where, somewhere around Butte, although some of the less toxic stuff forms a berm above that wetland there. But the remediation included scraping out those wetlands. So I just thought that potentially it's a great example of a pretty successful remediation effort, and something that I really wanted to try to celebrate and see how things were going. And I think the dragonflies and damselflies are good indicators of what's going on, because they live most of their life underwater. And so having decent quality of water to live in their larval form or nymph form, is essential. And we now have, issues remaining, but things are livable for the most part for many aquatic life forms now in the Clark Fork water system. Maclay Flat, of course, the irrigation ditch and wetlands there represent a little bit different water system because it's coming from the Bitterroot a little bit, although I think these life forms certainly enjoy living along the irrigation ditch. I don't know that it doesn't seem to me that they use that flowing water as much for their life cycle, but there are these wetlands close by as well. But they're interesting. So I more or less try to get to both of these sites every week or so from May through October, and started doing that in 2024 and have continued to do it and are doing it a little bit more regularly. Try to do it about the same time of day. My photographs with my wonderful little Nikon Coolpix V500 camera, I will take and then enter those observations through the Montana Field Guide and iNaturalist. And then insofar as possible, other people who know what they're doing will verify. And then once the observations have been verified, then they become part of the data set in the field guide that shows where different species of all kinds of life forms are distributed in the state. So I should have brought my papyrus of a paper sheet that I have been using. I did have to get a new sheet this year, but it got well worn last year, and it's getting well worn this year. And then I have an Excel sheet and keep it all in Google Drive as well. Then I have been working on summarizing the data. There is also a place called Odonata Central. I haven't entered as much of my data there, but they're a taxonomic database across the country from the Dragonfly Society of North America. It's basically pretty similar to what you do in iNaturalist in terms of entering data. So this winter I'm going to add my backlog of data to that as well. So if any of you get photographic observations of whatever life forms you're interested in, you can go in there to what life form you think it is, particularly when I'm as sure as I can be of what it is, then I click on the iNaturalist Submit Montana Observations, and I have my iNaturalist account, and I can enter my photographic data in the field guide. The data includes the date and the location. And you basically can use there's a map that you can pretty well pinpoint the location of what you're observing. So here's what I've seen so far over the last couple of years. Maclay Flat, I've done a few more observations. And the main thing is that you'll see, this is really a very quasi-scientific process because life gets in the way. And whatever. I had a lot of stuff going on between June and July of 2024. And I only gave myself heat exhaustion once this year so far. And I think I've learned a lesson from that. But you can see, I'm not sure that there's that much to say, except Milltown does seem to be a little richer environment in terms of being able to observe, and you will see that both in terms of numbers of individuals and also the complexity of the species there. This year, for whatever reason, they have not cut off the flow of the irrigation ditch, even though Lolo Creek went dry for a while, at least the far lower end. Who knows? I guess I've heard that the irrigation ditch basically can... Sorry, I'm not going to say anything political. They just have been around for a long time, longer than the Lolo National Forest, and they do their things. And then everybody else who's around it deals with whatever the fallout is. So for whatever reason, they decided to cut off the irrigation ditch. And I guess I'm not really sure what difference that makes. Because as I said, there are these other wetlands where the dragonflies and damselflies can go. But I think maybe it's a little bit less going on after that cutoff. And this year it's flowing full speed ahead as of yesterday. So at the far south end of Milltown Ponds, Deer Creek goes through there, and for some reason, that ended up being cut off last year for about a month. And I have no idea what was going on with that. But it has remained in flow this year. But the ponds have dried up. So that's been odd and interesting. And for what it's worth, these are just sort of this maybe doesn't really mean that much, but the temperatures in general this is just like the starting temperature of when I start these things, and it just sort of gives you an idea that it's relatively consistent. I mean, when I started doing this, I did read a little bit about like what people did when they did butterfly surveys and things like that. Now there's some clear differences in a little bit in the habitat and just how you might go about observing them, but at least I try to just do the same thing every time that I go. Try to have it be as consistent as possible. But yeah, I'm just one person, and
Was that water temperature or
air temperatures. And that's a good question, though. The question was that water temperature, air temperature? And that's something that I feel like would add to my understanding if I could decide what's the best way to determine water temperature, because there are a lot of different bodies of water to think about at Milltown. But there's good reason to believe that water temperature has to be a crucial factor, because the adults are emerging from the water at some point, and something's cueing them that it's time to do that. And I think it's pretty clear because of the season of the year, and pretty much I don't observe them until I begin to plant my garden, my tomato garden. So generally kind of late May is when they start to emerge, and I think the water temperature is going along with that. So you can see Maclay Flat. What I really think the main thing is that's going on here is that I missed most of the earliest season, which is pretty active for four-spotted skimmers and dot-tailed whitefaces. And so in 2025, I'm basically just filling that in. But you see a lot of the same species predominating. And I love Maclay Flat because of the emerald spreadwings, and I'll show a picture, of course, in a little bit. They're really something. There's west of the divide, we get some of these species that are named for California. And so we get to see California darners early in the season. June, July is their flight season. And they're a little smaller than most of the other darners, just to the 3-inch or under size versus a little bit bigger than that. And so even though I do my route along the irrigation ditch, it's kind of cool just to walk through the forest, and a fair number of the darners and some of the other species you'll just see flying around the forest, and they'll perch in the trees. So just walking along the trails in the forest, you can sometimes see them perching. Darners fly all the time, it seems to me, for the most part. So I always feel like it's a miracle if I actually get a picture of one hovering. I'm not sure I even have a picture like that in here. Maybe I have one or two. The four-spotted skimmers are gorgeous. They're a little bigger, not the biggest of the damselflies. And this would have been my one joke about dragonflies, is what do you call these dot-tailed whitefaces? Well, they are named for what they look like, at least, you know. You can actually see the white face on this one, and the dot on the tail. And they're sort of smallish. Yes?
This might be a really silly question, but what's the difference between a dragonfly and a damselfly?
Oh, yeah. So the question was, what's the difference between a dragonfly and a damselfly? Size, position of wings, which I mentioned the wing position for damselflies. Dragonflies generally will have their wings out at, perpendicular to their bodies, or sometimes they'll be like this, not back like this mostly. So that's a big thing. And then the eyes of the dragonflies are right next to each other, and damselflies' eyes are on the side. Thanks. Then as we move into the season, the white-faced meadowhawks, you might have noticed that they tend to be around for a pretty long time. And I'm just showing a female which does not have a white face. But it has a sort of a pale green face, green or yellow face. So the white-faced meadowhawks are named for the males. And I might have a picture of the males. The males are a lovely orange, but you see that sort of triangular pattern of black along the abdomen. Both the males and females have that triangulation. And the white meadowhawk males have a pretty obvious little white face and orange. And then I mentioned this happens to be a female emerald spreadwing. That occasionally I can coax them to perch on my finger. Not just the spreadwings, some different dragonflies and damselflies occasionally will do that. It's not something that I try to do that often, but every once in a while just the mood hits me, or it just seems like there's somebody that maybe, is not going to be too irritated by me. Lyre-tip spreadwings have the males of the spreadwings are distinguished by these are part of their sexual organs that help them attach behind the head of the female as they're beginning their mating process. And so the lyre tip is the distinguishing feature. You can see that shape. And then different of the other spread wings have different, those where that lyre shape is those are called the paraprops. And these are cerci around the outside. Both males and females of many of the dragonflies and damselflies have those outer cerci, but then inside the paraprops help the males and the females of each different species be able to connect with each other properly. And there's my male white-faced meadowhawk, still flying in August. There are some other, paddle-tailed darners are the predominant darner species that I seem to see. But there are occasionally other species. And distinguishing among different darners mostly is helped by what season you're seeing them in. And this just happened to be a variable darner. They have very small, much smaller and narrower stripes on their thorax, so that upper part of their body behind their eyes, than do the paddle-tailed darners, for example. But the pattern of dots and stripes of blue along the abdomen also distinguishes different species. It's a little tricky to get that sorted out.
What's the purpose of the dot on their wings? I noticed that
Oh, the stigma, those dots, those dots, generally there are 4 of them on both dragonflies and damselflies, those are pterostigma. I'm not sure but they do help to, in some cases, to identify what species, because some species, especially among the meadowhawks, they can have different colors, and that can help you, because a lot of the males of different meadowhawks are orange, and then those patterns along the abdomen can help, and also the colors of those. It's usually, oftentimes people just use the term stigma instead of pterostigma. Yeah, thanks. And then, you know, there are moose at Maclay Flat, and I was not close to her at all. She was way over in the wetlands on the other side of the ditch, so that was okay. And there are lots of cool birds there passing through. And this year, the red crossbills seem to enjoy all the trees that have been cut down by the irrigation ditch contractors, apparently by mistake. And, or at least that was what it said in the newspaper earlier this year. And my nature journaling group and I were sitting along that little beach at Maclay Flat, and we kept seeing this spotted sandpiper, and we were also seeing a crane fly sort of hanging around in the water, and that spotted sandpiper got a really lovely snack. Okay, so Milltown Ponds has a lot more going on in terms of species in general. And I realize this is sort of ridiculous. I'm sure that there are some really cool graphics that I could figure out how to use to show you the diversity of species better than this. But at least I tried to use the same color for species for different years. Same color and pattern insofar as possible. And there were definitely, there have been like a couple species that I saw in 2024 that I didn't see in 2025, and vice versa. And a little bit different diversity. And there really have been somewhat fewer that I've observed this year, because it seems to me the drought has persisted, and that just has meant the ponds are not pondy as much, and that's got to be playing a role there. So both Milltown and Maclay Flat have 12 spotted skimmers, but Milltown can be teeming with them. The dot-tailed whitefaces as well. So they tend to arise pretty early in the year, along with the 4 spotted skimmers. There are just a lot more pond damselflies. The bluets, at least 2 or 3 different kinds are the main ones that I've seen there. There are subtle distinctions among bluets that I might not be quite, attuned to, yes.
Is there a particular time of day you prefer?
Well, I'm usually going when just sort of in the middle of the day, like morning-ish, and I imagine if you went when it's even like warmer, there might be a little bit more activity. But yeah, definitely wait till it warms up a little bit is what I do, yeah. Although I have rarely observed emergence of the adults from the larval form. And I'm not showing those images here, but I have heard that they tend to emerge early in the day. So that might be if that was something you were particularly interested in doing, is hanging out right by the edges of ponds where they're coming up out of the water, usually onto some vegetation or maybe some other, like a rock or something like that. That early in the day is the time to do that. Yeah.
So do you see certain species like more prevalent early in the day and you see later in the day?
Oh, I don't know about that because I really haven't like tried to do that, but that's a really interesting question. I haven't seen sedge sprites at Milltown this year. Who knows? They seem to be rarer, but they're just really gorgeous. I guess my photographs sort of do them justice, but they've also got that wonderful, interesting kind of little pattern on their lower the end of their abdomen, the S9 segment of their abdomen, as well as that emerald green thorax and those eyes. So they're sort of rare, but I thought that was fun to actually see them. And a lot of meadowhawks, saffron-winged meadowhawks. The female is really where you see more of the saffron, bright yellow color. The males are darker, so you see these bands that are more orangey in the males of the saffron-winged meadowhawks. And not a great picture, but just flotillas of 12-spotted skimmers are there sometimes. And every once in a while I get to see perching darners. And I led now 2 years in a row I've led local hikes for Wild Montana. I'm part of the board of our local chapter. And we do these things that we're calling random walks. And a board member or chapter member will just announce a walk about a week before, and the members know about it. And so we went to Milltown the end of August, and this darner just flew right by us along the trail and perched in the grass right next to us. And so I just told people my work was done that day. Because why not take credit for it? But then some lovely people in the group who were birders noticed another one right up in the tree above us. These do not perch that much, in my experience. They mostly are flying like crazy, looking for mates or things to eat over water, and other places. I mean, they'll roam a fair bit, but it's pretty cool. And occasionally you get to see them mating as well. And there can be tons of muskrats there. And lovely snakes. And one of our friends on the first year I led a dragonfly walk there, Chris Evevold, found this wonderful carapace of a painted turtle there. That would scare off predators, wouldn't it? Seems to me. And I never had seen baby coots before, but they were at Milltown last year. A pair of migrating herons, some other cool things. Bancroft Ponds, of course, is a great spot. So it's one of the places where you I have occasionally been able to photograph a hovering darner. And I saw a Virginia rail there. It was so weird. I mean, I've been told by people that that's like once in a lifetime experience, but there's this bridge there and a little place with a lot of dead logs where the dragonflies hang out. And this molting Virginia rail was just hanging out there. I was like 6 feet away from it for a long time, and it was just like hanging out there. And maybe you know Cattail Corner, new wetland just established in the last year. So I was eager to go there this year and see what's going on. And it's got a lot of life, including a little bit different set of dragonflies. It's close to Bancroft Ponds. You know, it's right there where the Sinclair station is, 39th and Russell. And you can just park in like the Albertsons parking lot and go and walk around it. There's quite a bit going on there. And there was a redneck phalarope there a couple weeks ago, hanging out too. That was something. Silver Lagoon is kind of scrubby, right? I mean, it's got a lot of trash and maybe not, whatever. There's a fair amount of damselfly and dragonfly life going on there most of the summer. And so I got to watch this pair of Thule bluets trying to get their act together. And that leaf was really sort of in the way, but the male was very patient, and the female was doing most of the work because she's kind of the one who can actually see what's going on, because she's got to get her ovipositor, or her bottom end where her eggs are, connected up to his second, third abdominal segment, which is where his penis is, and what are called hamules, which is this opening that allows their coupling to happen. And it took them a good while to figure it out, but they did. Whatever. It's just very cool and interesting, and yeah, I don't know. They just have figured out things.
What is the life cycle of that?
Well, I'm not sure. Different species have a little bit different life cycles. In general, they are months to a year, and sometimes a few years in larval form or nymph form. And then, at least in this part of the country, they will live for weeks to a few months, just, you know, in the summer when it's warm enough. So generally their adult stage is just not longer than 2 or 3 months. There are a couple of species that migrate, and I'll mention one of them later. Yes?
So when you see two of them, one on top of the other,
Yeah.
they're not just hanging out.
Right. They either are getting ready to couple, you know, get the sperm and the eggs together, or they may have already done that, and the male is sort of helping the female by doing the flying while the female is getting to expend all her energy getting those eggs shaken out as to wherever they're going. Yeah. And they either will deposit the eggs into plants or into water, and that depends on the species. And then the eggs, either the eggs will become larvae during that season, or in some species, the eggs will overwinter. Yeah, right. Yeah, they just are sort of more or less, it seems pretty random to me.
How many eggs do they lay?
How many eggs do they lay? I don't know. That's something I need to learn more about. I don't know. It's at least dozens. Yeah. It's probably more than that.
So when you see them flying along the water and like going down, touching the water, depositing eggs?
Yes. If you see, and you may see a female by herself, but if she's dipping her abdomen in the water, that's what she's doing. Yeah. So this was a very odd thing. Western red damsels are not that uncommon, but I've never seen them here. I've seen them in southwestern Montana and some sort of shallow, scrubby, sort of marshy areas. Well, they're right below the waterworks, on Waterworks Hill, there's a seep. And probably hardly any of you have actually been to this seep, because you know, if you go along the gentler trail to go up Waterworks to the Peace Garden, Along there, right below where the waterworks is, there is just this little seep, this little water area that's there permanently. And I was just there with my nature journaling group, drawing the flax flowers that were blooming. And I just happened to notice out of the corner of my eye, I was sitting right by this water, there was a western red damselfly there. And so it's a patch of water, probably no bigger than this. But I think it's there permanently. And they were there for at least a couple of months. I went back repeatedly, and they seem to have disappeared as of about a month ago. But 2 months in the summer, you can go up there and see them, and there were some 12-spotted skimmers for a little while, too. This time of year, shadow darners are a thing. And maybe you know about them because you've been to Lolo Peak Brewery and had the Oktoberfest Shadow Darner Ale, which is how, I knew what they were, but I didn't know that they were a thing here. And at Riverside Park, right there by the Bitterroot, dead end there in Lolo. Now, although I was there just a couple of days ago and I didn't end up seeing them, but I think I was just kind of maybe at the wrong time of day. But there are shadow darners, and shadow darners are named because they have a greater amount of black along the abdomen than most of the other darners. So they're having fun right now. I realize I'm sort of toward the end of my time, but I was scouting a hike that I was asked to help with, and it didn't end up happening, at Clearwater Lake, which probably a lot of you know about, have been to. This was early August, and I ended up taking a picture of this creature that is a belted whiteface. But when I first saw it, I kept thinking, oh, I've seen this in my Dragonfly book, in Paulson's Guide, and I initially thought Hudsonian whiteface. Well, Hudsonian whiteface has more, it's hard to see on this picture, but the Hudsonian whiteface has red dots all along here. And this one doesn't quite have that. It's got this red here. And then there's this other species called a crimson-ringed whiteface. And the crimson-ringed whiteface has extra little panes along the middle section of its hind wing that on the belted white, so that really the only distinction between the belted whiteface and the crimson-ringed whiteface that's really obvious is something that you have to get a good enough picture of the wing to see. In this case, and I'm sorry, this still doesn't quite do it justice, but right along here it's called the radial planate part of the hind wing. It doesn't have these double panes there. So the other point of this is that they all three apparently live in the same locations, which is along the Swan Valley, up to Polson, Clearwater Lake. I think we saw some at Rainy Lake also, although I didn't get pictures to know exactly what species. So that'll be fun to see what's going on with them. Okay. Seemed like I might have, oh, whatever, I'm just going to move on. Maybe it's here later. Oh, yeah, it is at the end. So, this is the one dragonfly I saw when I was in Big Bend in 2024. It was awesome, though. A flag-tailed spiny legs. That is a very Texan name, I think. Quite the attitude, also. And the Rio Grande is like a puddle down there. At least in April when we were there, there was hardly any water, but enough for them to hang out. We have a friend who we invited ourselves to go and see the eclipse in Texas in April 2024, and the weather sucked in Kerrville where we went with her to see it, but we had a great time. And she has a wonderful ranch pond that has common basket tails and red saddlebags. They're amazing. And then we got to go to Pat's niece's wedding in Chicago last September, and I'm thinking, oh, here's a lovely white-faced meadowhawk. Well, it turns out it's a blue-faced meadowhawk. You can see that, and the pattern on the abdomen's a little different. So we don't have them here, but they do in Chicago. And Chicago has a lot of awesome wetlands, by the way, and parks and stuff like that. And my former hometown, where I did not know one dang thing about dragonflies or damselflies for the 30 and a half years that I lived and worked there. Of course, I had to make my friends when we visited take us to the wetlands in Ames. And they have citrine forktails, among other things. We were also in the middle of a common green darner migration. I don't know if I have a picture of them. So this is one of my little claims to fame. Argia is a journal from the Dragonfly Society of the Americas. And you can submit photographs to be best of 2024. So this is my picture that made it to the best of 2024. Yes, sir.
Those are great shots. What kind of camera are you using?
It's a Nikon Coolpix B500. And I use a macro setting on it, and auto. But it doesn't always like to focus on what I want it to focus on, so it can be a little twitchy. But this guy was patient, enough, just stayed there. So also my friends and relatives in Missouri and Kansas have farm ponds. And this is the tiniest dragonfly in the world, I think. They're only like an inch long, but they're incredible. Gorgeous, named for the females. They're eastern amberwings, but awesome patterns and amber color. They're really something. And then they have pond hawks, eastern pond hawks, and the green females and the blue and turquoise males are very cool. And here's some of my little pictures from around here that I've put together. And I have lots of plans. I'm going to continue surveying as long as I'm able. So we'll see. But it's great. I love doing something that's a little hard. Yes, ma'am.
Why do some of them have their wings right next to their sides and some of them don't?
That is the nature of the species, right? The narrow-winged damselflies carry their wings along the abdomen, and then the dragonflies generally have their wings outstretched. Yeah. Yeah, yes?
So for the eggs and the pupae, are they able to handle some of the desiccation with some of these drought conditions?
I'm not sure about that. I think that some species probably do better. And they don't have pupa, they're larvae, if that matters. But yeah, they're larvae, and they go through somewhere between 10 and 15 different moltings before they reach their adult form. And again, that can be a season in some cases, but generally like at least a year, and for some of the larger species, up to 5 years, they're living as larvae, yeah. So they have ways of dealing with the winter. You know, living in ponds that are deep enough that still have water, or they have mud, or like there's at least one species that uses a crayfish burrow to burrow in.
So do their larvae,
Not a species here, but at other places, yeah.
do their larvae have gills then?
Yes, yes.
We oftentimes see dragonflies well away from water in
Yeah.
habitat. Have you any information about the range of individual?
No, that is a great, the question was, what about their range? Because you can definitely see them a fair ways away from water. I've seen them up on Blue Mountain, you know, a mile or two away from water. I've seen them up on fairly far up Mount Jumbo or Sentinel or whatever also. So one of the things that I wanted to mention is we do have a migrating species out here, variegated meadowhawks. And maybe some of you have been on Frolic Trail or maybe on Mount Sentinel Fire Road in June, and you might be surrounded by a cloud of them. So some of you might have had that experience, and you might have had that experience and not even realize. But they will just be on the trail and can easily be sort of scared up. And I'm showing you both the male and the female and not really doing justice to them, but they're wonderful. And we do see them this time of year, but they don't seem to migrate south in swarms. The northern migration in June, they seem to be in swarms, but not going south, apparently, or at least, or I haven't been in the right places to see them going south. Yeah.
Years ago, my husband and I drove up Granite Creek, which is near Lolo Pass. And Granite Pass is one pass north of Lolo Pass. We were driving up this road, and it was in late September, I believe, and there was swarms of variegated meadowhawks.
Wow, awesome. Awesome,
So
thanks.
They do swarm up in the fall at times.
That's great, thanks.
I don't know how predictable it is. So.
That's great to know, thanks.
Where are they migrating to?
That's a great question. As far as I'm aware, I have looked a little bit, and I have not seen that anyone has published a study about that. The common green darners migration has been studied fairly much, and they can migrate several hundred miles to even a couple thousand miles. And we do have them here, but I haven't really seen them swarming. Again, maybe I just haven't been in the right spots. But I would love to be able to do that. I'm hoping to try to do something a little bit more serious in terms of investigating the variegated meadowhawk migration. And there are some people, I don't know if, the micro tracking devices, if someone was really scientific, I think they're getting small enough. I mean, for studying the common green darners, they basically were wearing this little tracker backpack that weighed like 25% of their body weight, and they were able to track them migrating about more than like around 100 miles in a day. And then they would rest for 3 days and then keep going. But I'm not aware that people have studied the variegated meadowhawk migration yet. That would be cool. And I've been told or looked in my guidebook that there are a bunch of species here that I've never seen that I think would be really cool. The flame skimmers are awesome. We're, in theory, in their range. Paiute dancers I thought would be fun to see, go to Warm Springs and see them. Yes?
Are they, so the adults all carnivores, is that?
Yeah, they're insectivores, yeah. Yeah. I mean, their larvae could be carnivores because they can eat, if they're big enough, they can eat little fish and amphibians and stuff like that too. Yeah. But they're insectivores. Yep. And I'd love to see emeralds. Apparently there are several emeralds in this vicinity, but I've never seen one. And I think maybe you just have to go to a little bit more remote places or, hike up. Yeah, I don't know. But anyway, thank you all for your patience with me, and this has been great.
Any other questions while Suzanne's here?
Yes. 4, 8, and 12. Yeah.
Referring to a specific marking?
It is sort of, but it's a little complicated. The 4 spotted skimmers have a distinctive dot in the middle of the wing, okay? Whereas the 12 and 8 spotted skimmers are based on bands that are on their wings. Yeah, so it's a little bit different patterns that we're looking at.
In any of these species out there that you've observed that there have been like outlying behaviors, and you've seen that have like expanded or challenged your understanding of their lifestyles?
Are there unusual behaviors? I'm sort of paraphrasing the question. Behaviors that I've observed in them that I've sort of wondered about. Not really, except the idea that you can find them not that close to water. You know, that they're, you know, and sort of how far they're flying. And, you know, I think that they generally are living in an environment where it's pretty easy to find other insects to eat, you know? I mean, our environment seems to be, at least at, you know, that time of year, it's pretty good, and they're going after, they go after a range of things. You know, dragonflies can eat damselflies even. I've seen them eating all kinds of different, well, I shouldn't say all kinds. Something with a really hard exoskeleton generally is not a thing that they would eat that much. I have seen them maybe with a small butterfly once in a while, but mostly just soft-bodied insects. I don't know. I haven't observed birds eating them. That's one of the things that I've been interested in trying to understand a little bit more of. And I have understood now that great blue herons like to eat the emerging dragonflies. So that would be something cool to figure out how to hang out in such a way that, I mean, every time I see a great blue heron, they're gone. I mean, they're pretty skittish. So figuring out how to set myself up in a nice blind where a heron is actually going to be, and you know, they do hang, they're territorial, and they're definitely ones that hang out in the same kind of place. So that predator-prey thing, I think, would be cool to look at more. Yeah. Yeah, yes?
Can you tell the difference between dragonflies and damselflies while they're flying, or just when they land?
Yeah, pretty sort of while they're flying, just by body size, because the damselflies are more delicate. Yeah.
How do they catch their prey? Do they catch them on the wing? Do they ambush?
They generally they're in flight, and they are incredibly successful. And the Department of Defense, I'm still calling it that. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. Has funded studies because they're interested in whether there's something about how wonderfully quickly they can respond to intercept things that might be used defensively. Whatever, that's...
We're tracking with you.
Well, so that means they got to put electrodes into a dragonfly's brain to try to understand what is allowing them to respond as quickly as they do, and it's all predicated on their vision. They have amazing vision, and they have no hearing. So that's really interesting. Although they have these little antennae that I think help with vibration sensing a little bit. I don't think people fully understand what the antennae do. Yes?
When you're observing them, like I guess you can't really know, like for different observations, different weeks, but during the same hour slot, how do you make sure you're not counting the same individual?
That is a great question. How do I know if I'm counting the same individual or not? That's definitely tricky, because I definitely have, if there aren't huge numbers, and usually there aren't like dozens all around me. There's usually like a handful of individuals. I have sometimes seen an individual going along the path with me, right? Like I'm walking along a trail or making a path, and it's going with me. So I'm just doing the best I can to pay attention to that. Yeah. But counting, there are definitely times when counting is, that's not going to, I'm not going to be very accurate with that. Yes?
We moved into a home in Lolo this last year, and we have a canal that runs behind our house, and so there's very nice places to sit and just observe. We've just been overwhelmed with the number of dragonflies and damselflies. But in terms of observation, what do you recommend for a best place to go to kind of report what you're seeing or document or observe what you're seeing?
Well, it seems like the critical thing is getting to a place where you're good and feel comfortable enough with photographing. Either phone cameras, I've seen some people with amazing phone cameras. With a camera, I think that's really the thing that I'm putting into the field guide. It's that observation. Yeah. It's a great question. And so when I started thinking about this, there's a whole field of, studying dragonflies and damselflies that's based on seeing their exuviae, the husks, after they've emerged as adults. And I've only ever found one exuvium. They're rather fragile. They're hiding in grass and weeds, and sort of mucky, pondy areas where they're emerging from. But a lot of the literature, people have been, they've got territories marked out very carefully that they go back to repeatedly and collect what's there. Yeah. And then get into identifying the difference between a common green darner exuvium and a paddle-tailed darner exuvium. And they don't, they have what I would call much more subtle differences. And there is a whole huge book about that, but I don't have it. And there's a lot. Yeah, a lot to think about. Thanks. Thank you all.
And thanks everyone for coming. The next Bugs and Brews is going to be on October 23rd, and we're going to hear from the late, is it Guskio? She's the program manager with Ripple, which is the Center for Education and Ecosystem Studies, and she'll be talking about their education efforts with aquatic invertebrates. So that should be a good one coming up in September. And just as a funny thing, you saw also the picture of the dot-tailed whiteface. And when you're out there and you're seeing new things, years ago, my wife and I were out at the bison range, and I'm looking through the binoculars at this dragonfly, and I'm like, I've never seen this one before. And I'm trying to describe it to her because she's got the ID book, and it's got a dot on the tail and a white face. And we looked it up, and it was a dot-tailed white face.